Hey, what's going on, everybody? So happy to see you here on another Lost In. You know, one of the cool things about living here in Brazil is there's a lot of cool cars that I've never seen, never heard of, and that's really exciting. We Americans are always enamored with like Japan and Europe because there's so many cool cars over there that we just never got. And the cool thing about here in Brazil is they're here. A lot of these European cars, the Opel Chevette, you know, very cool car. Just never saw it in America. The Corcel, well, it's a baby muscle car. Well, Chrysler Dodge had one of their own. Coming from the European line and brought here to Brazil, it was a totally cool little car. And this is the story all about. Strap on in, you're lost, let's go. 1970s, General Motors was analyzing the project 909 that was still in development. Volkswagen started from scratch with Project 102. Dodge Chrysler do Brasil opted out for the Hillman two-door Avenger, famously designed by Mr. Roy Axe. The Avenger was manufactured by Chrysler's subsidiary, Roots. Ever since 1970 in the United Kingdom, Chrysler believed that they had the advantage over the competition because they were opting out for the nationalization of a vehicle that already had a strong market over in Europe. June 1970, Chrysler began the design of the new vehicle, along with the approval by the Brazilian government to design a car that can compete with the Fusca 1300. Due to internal strife at the automaker, there was a delay of a Hillman Avenger for study. Do that research! This was scheduled for December 1970. The Hillman Avenger wouldn't be imported into Brazil until the following year, 1971. To assist with this development, Chrysler also imported a Mitsubishi Colt. Cool car. In one of the first appearances in the Brazilian press, the Avenger was considered weak.
You say you're a 10-pound weakling?
It was a no-go in the Brazilian eyes. So, Chrysler do Brasil vowed that unlike the British Avenger, the Brazilian version would have more power. The choice for 1800 served to adorn the new 1800 Chrysler Dodge. The overboasting power for this engine out was 90 horsepower. Going through extensive testing, the Dodge 1800 was really put through its ropes. However, in the midst of all this development, there was a presidential coup over at Dodge Chrysler.
My design was perfect.
Merle D. Haggis out and brought in Burke Hyde. I'm Mr. Burke. The introduction of this little Dodge 1800 was scheduled for 1973. In August 1971, Chrysler Argentina beat Brazil to the punch and released the 1500. It was the Buenos Aires version of the Dodge 1800 here in Brazil. Chrysler do Brasil started negotiations with their Argentina branch to bring over some pieces and other cars to help in the Brazilian development. And all this was really in hopes to try to launch the car for the 8th annual Sao Paulo Auto Show. Fancy. Even Chrysler's world president, John Ricardo, announced that another
$1 million.
No.
$25 million would be invested into the project to see it happen. At the 8th Sao Paulo Auto Show, fancy, the little Dodge made its debut in 1972 in an interview published by Journal do Brasil on August 21st. Mr. Burke Hyde famously stated, "It'll be the only car to meet the conditions of the Brazilian roads." At the show, the most visible and significant changes to the little 1800 from its counterpart, the Avenger, the European Avenger, was the interior. It was completely redone. Everything from steering wheels, shifter knobs, little buttons on the dash, the seats, the door cards, everything on the inside was redone. The body was essentially the same, and also the taillights and the front grille were crafted for the Brazilian market. For the taste of the Brazilian market, this was offered only as a 2-door. The European version did get a 4-door and a 2-door. Mr. Chrysler president, Burke Hyde, announced that the assembly line should do about 80 cars per week with an annual output, that's yearly, of 50,000 cars. Out of the starting gate, this little Dodge had heavy competition. Heavy hitters were out there. We had the Corcel, the Brasileira, the Chevette. All of these were right there competing with it. With this on the horizon, there seemed to be about a 40-day waiting list for cars to get at the dealership. Mr. Brick Hyde decided to up the game to 90 cars a day and over 189,000 cars per year. Shortly after this little Dodge was launched, failures began to appear. May 30th, 1973, Jornal do Brasil carried out a test, noting a strong vibration in the steering wheel, between 95 and 105 kilometers per hour. This is 1970 something, you don't need to be driving that fast. There's also problems in the door seals and the weather brakes that allowed moisture and water to get inside the vehicle. Note the boom. Also, on top of water getting into the cabin, there was problems with the coupler of reverse gear. So it just like not go into reverse or pop out of reverse. It was a nightmare. And the journalists were really not impressed with this, and they also stated that the vehicle felt very underpowered. With the negative test results, the first real signs that something was really amiss was in the market. October 1973, the Brazilian press reported on a lack of cars at dealerships. There were no Fuscas, there were no Brasilias, there were no Chevettes, there was no Corcels, there was just really no cars at dealerships. Ford, Chevy, Volkswagen, they took up to 90 days of delivery for vehicles. It was a long waiting list. However, Chrysler, upping their output, had one of these little 1800s in almost every dealership. And I mean, there was more than enough for prompt delivery. However, not even this wide availability encouraged people to buy this little Brazilian 1800. The Brazilian people choose to wait up to 180 days to get their Chevette or their Corcel or Brasilia. The Dodge 1800 reviews by Quatro Rodas magazine was damaging at best and crippling at worst. In a comparative test between the Fusca, Volkswagen TL, Brasilia, Corcel, Chevette, and Dodge 1800, presented in the August 1973 edition, the Chrysler model did not justify its inflated price over its competitors. Evaluated and ranked modestly at 4th place, behind the Chevette, Corcel, and Brasilia, and in the performance category, despite its larger motor, they said it performed about like a 1300 Fusca. In fuel consumption, it ranked last. Not good for 1970s. Faced with the disappointing results of the 1800, Dodge promoted changes to the engine, which went from 78 HP to about 82 HP. A wee bit improvement. It is.
If you can cope with a whole new image, you could be Dodge material.
But they really boasted about this in its advertisement, going on about how the acceleration of the vehicle goes from 0 to 100 km/h in about 15 seconds. It's 1973, you don't need to go that fast. Next year, the magazine Quatro Rodas did the 30,000 kilometer test, and this did not go well for the little 1800. It had 14 major failing points. During these tests, the gearbox broke 3 times. From the engine to the finish, everything was considered poorly done. Although the magazine did point out that this was one of the first products off the assembly line, so granted, there was going to be some failures. More crippling than this is the report shined a light, poor service, and the fact they were not honoring warranties. No go, that's no. The impact of this report ruined the reputation of the Dodge 1800 in the population's eye, and the consumers really started avoiding the Dodge like stinky, steamy dog poop in the morning. Later, Chrysler announced the Total Warranty Package, pledging to repair every single broken 1800, and Chrysler Dodge also invested in small improvements in the motor, and also in the gearbox. Hey, that's something. And also, while they did these small fixes, they really pushed their advertisement, really aggressive advertisement. However, none of this helped Dodge. Their sales continued to plummet. In May of that year, sales really began to fall hard, like grandma with a couple shots in her. At the end of 1975, the production of the 1800 was cut in half compared to the previous year. Those pesky negative test results cost Chrysler do Brasil the world. Actually, just the 4th place in the automotive market. Fun fact, 1978, Chrysler do Brasil even lost to Fiat, but let's go back to 1975. Failure of the Dodge 1800 was attributed to an unfortunate launch, prices in the market, and Chrysler's greedy little desire to get ahead of General Motors, Volkswagen, and Ford. Bad judgment, they prematurely launched the 1800 before all the rough edges were ironed out. You gotta work out the bugs. The result of poor quality control really cost the 1800 its Brazilian reputation, gave it a really negative public image. In 1975, relaunched as the Polara, this package of improvements were presented to the public by Chrysler do Brasil. For the launch of the 1976 line, the name Polara was assigned and used until the end of the production. Also, at the 1975 Auto Show, Chrysler do Brasil presented a concept version, a 4-door Polara, but due to economic strife, this never saw the light of day, was never produced. Things really turned around in 1976. The Polara was on top of the world! Being elected president of the world, or being elected car of the year by Autosport magazine, fancy. With this new popularity, the Polara got a facelift. 2 large square blocky headlights, new tail lights, an awesome Lions coat of arms ordained the front grille, and in 1979 the Polara was offered as an optional automatic and 4-speed manual gearbox. That same year, Chrysler Dodge was gobbled up by Volkswagen. The big bad wolf came and ate him. In 1980, Chrysler do Brasil, Chrysler do Volkswagen Brasil, relaunched the Polaris as the luxury version, named the GLS and also the Luxo Sport, a sports variant with several upgrades, double-body carburetors, ventilation systems that allowed heat, wow, fancy, radio tape player, gotta have one, an electric antenna, cool, and lots of other amenities. 1981, Volkswagen ended the life of the Dodge 1800. And all the other Dodge lines. Dodge pickups were rolled over into Volkswagen and produced a little bit longer, but 1981 saw the end of Brazilian-produced Dodges. April of that year, with an interview with Quatro Rodas magazine, when inquired about the future of the Dodge line, the big president of Volkswagen do Brasil, Mr. Wolfgang Sauer, replied, "I can only sell cars if there's a demand for them. And everyone knows there is no demand for these. I'm literally selling more for export. They will be manufactured for another 5, 6, maybe 7 months, but after that..." In my head, that's how he sounds. Needless to say, this interview felt like a bomb, closing a chapter in iconic Brazilian automotive history. Wow, the end of another legacy car. Tell me what you think of this awesome little car. And that's it for right now. I really want to thank you guys for joining me. If you haven't, please subscribe, give a thumbs up, and share this with your primo. Man, it might bother him, but it means the world to me, so thank you so much for your time and your energy. I'll see you on the flip side. Até a próxima. Ciao, ciao.